back at it for day 4 by becoming more real, more well read. Um, I get this quick one in before I hop in the shower. Just getting back from a little workout or whatnot. Gotta make sure I stay sharp on my skills. Gotta make sure my float good, my jumper good, my handle good. You know what I'm saying? But back with Steve Jobs. We got chapter 16. It's titled Gates and Jobs When Orbits Intersect. Got a picture of Jobs and Gates, 1991. Hop straight into it. The Macintosh Partnership. In astronomy, a binary system occurs when the orbits of two stars are linked because of their gravitational interaction. There have been analogous. Definitely gotta look for that one. Anala. All right, analogous situations in history. In history, when an era is shaped by the relationship and rivalry of two orbiting superstars, Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr, in 20th century physics, for example, or Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton in early American governance. For the first 30 years of the personal computer age, beginning in the late 1970s, the defining binary star system was composed of two high-energy college dropouts, both born in 1955. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, despite their similar ambitions at the confluence of technology and business, had very different personalities and backgrounds. Gates' father was a prominent Seattle lawyer. His mother was a civic leader on a variety of prestigious boards. He became a tech geek at the area's finest private school, Lakeside High, but he was never a rebel, hippie, spiritual seeker, or member of the counterculture. Instead of a blue box to rip off the phone company, Gates created for his school a program for scheduling classes, which helped him get into one with the right girls, and a car counseling program for local traffic engineers. He went to Harvard, and when he decided to drop out, it was not to find enlightenment with an Indian guru, but to start a computer software company. He went to Harvard, and when he decided to drop out, it was not to find enlightenment with an Indian guru, but to start a computer software company. Say that to say, Job dropped out when to go chase enlightenment in India. True story. Gates was good at computer coding, unlike Jobs, and his mind was more practical, disciplined, and abundant in analytic processing power. Jobs was more intuitive and romantic, and had a greater instinct for making technology usable, design delightful, and interfaces friendly. He had a passion for perfection, which made him fiercely demanding, and he managed by charisma and scattershot intensity. Gates was more methodical. He held tightly scheduled product review meetings where he would cut to the heart of issues with lapidary lapidary skill. Both could be rude, but with Gates, who early in his career seemed to have a typical geek's flirtation with the fringes of the Asperger scale, the cutting behavior tended to be less personal, based more on intellectual incisiveness than emotional callousness. Jobs would stare at people with a burning, wounding intensity. Gates sometimes had trouble making eye contact, but he was fundamentally humane. Each one thought he was smarter than the other one, but Steve generally treated Bill as someone who was slightly inferior, especially in matters of taste of taste and style, said Andy Hertzfeld. Bill looked down on Steve because he couldn't actually program. From the beginning of their relationship, Gates was fascinated by Jobs and slightly envious of his mesmerizing effect on people, but he also found him fundamentally odd and weirdly flawed as a human being. He was put off by Jobs' rudeness and his tendency to be either in the mode of saying you were shit or trying to seduce you. For his part, Jobs found Gates unnervingly narrow. He'd be a broader guy if he had dropped acid once or ashram, uh, gone off to an ashram when he was younger. Jobs once declared their differences in personality and character would lead them to opposite sides of what would become the fundamental divide in the digital age. Jobs was a perfectionist who craved control and indulged in the uncompromising temperament of an artist. He and Apple became the exemplars of a digital strategy that tightly integrated hardware, software, and content into a seamless package. Gates was Gates was a smart, calculating, and pragmatic analyst of business and technology. He was open to licensing Microsoft's operating system and software to a variety of manufacturers. After 30 years, Gates would develop a grudging respect for Jobs. He never really knew much about technology, but he had an amazing instinct for what works, he said. But Jobs never reciprocated by fully appreciating Gates' real strength. Bill is basically unimaginative and has never invented anything, which is why I think he's more comfortable now in philanthropy than technology, Jobs said unfairly. He just shamelessly ripped off other people's ideas. When the Macintosh was first being developed, Jobs went up to visit Gates at his office near Seattle. Microsoft had written some applications for the Apple II, including a spreadsheet program called Multiplan, and Jobs wanted to excite Gates and company about doing even more for the forthcoming Macintosh. Sitting in Gates' conference room, Jobs spun an enticing vision of a computer for the masses, with a friendly interface which would be churned out by the millions in an automated California factory. His description of the dream factory sucking in the California silicone components and turning out finished Macintoshes caused the. Whew, I'm just running. I ain't even know what I just said. Sitting in Gates' conference room, Jobs spun an enticing vision of a computer for the masses with a friendly interface which would be churned out by the millions in an automated California factory. His description of the Dream Factory sucking in the California silicone components and turning out finished Macintoshes caused the Microsoft team to codename the project SAND. They even reverse engineered it into an acronym for Steve's Amazing New Device. Gates had launched Microsoft by writing a version of BASIC, a programming language for the Altair. Jobs wanted Microsoft to write a version of BASIC for the Macintosh because Wozniak, despite much prodding by Jobs, had never enhanced his version of the Apple II's BASIC to handle floating point numbers. In addition, Jobs wanted Microsoft to write application software such as spreadsheet, charting, and database programs for the Macintosh. At the time, Jobs was a king and Gates still a courtier. In 1982, Apple's annual sales were 1 billion, while Microsoft's were a mere 32 million. Gates signed on to do graphical versions of a new spreadsheet called Excel, a word processing program called Word, and Basic. While Microsoft's were a mere 32 million, Gates signed on to do graphical versions of a new spreadsheet called Excel. Huh. Okay. So he had 1 billion, he had 32 million. But bro hating. Talking about he can't really code. He can't do this, that, third. But bro had to earn that respect. And he earned it. But Excel, Microsoft Word, we all know about them. But that's why they had 32 million. Gates frequently went to Cupertino for demonstrations of the Macintosh operating system, and he was not very impressed. I remember the first time we went down. Steve had this app where it has just where it was just things bouncing around on the screen. He said that was the only app that ran. Gates was also put off by Jobs' attitude. It was kind of a weird seduction visit where Steve was saying, "We don't really need you, and we're doing this great thing," and it's under the cover. He's in his Steve Jobs sales mode, but kind of the sales mode that always says, "I don't need you, but I might let you be involved." The Macintosh pirates found Gates hard to take. You could tell that Bill Gates was not a very good listener. He couldn't bear to have anyone explain how something worked to him. He had to leap ahead instead it and guess about how he thought it would work. Hertzfeld recalled they showed him how the Macintosh cursor moved smoothly across the screen without flickering. "What kind of hardware do you use to draw the cursor?" Gates asked. Hertzfeld, who took great pride that they could achieve their functionality solely using software, replied. Mm, their functionality solely using software replied, "We don't have any special hardware for it." Gates insisted that it was necessary to have special hardware to move the cursor that way. "So what do you say to somebody like that?" Bruce Horn, one of the Macintosh engineers, later said, "It made it clear to me that Gates was not the kind of person that would understand or appreciate the elegance of a Macintosh." Despite their mutual wariness, both teams were excited by the prospect that Microsoft could Despite their mutual wariness, both teams were excited by the prospect that Microsoft would create graphical software for the Macintosh that would take personal computing into a new realm, and they went to dinner at a fancy restaurant to celebrate. Microsoft soon dedicated a large team to the task. We had more people working on the Mac than he did. Microsoft soon dedicated a large team to the task. We had more people working on the Mac than he did, Gates said. He had about 14 or 15 people. We had like 20. We really bet our life on it. And even though Jobs thought that they didn't exhibit much taste, the Microsoft programmers were persistent. They came out with applications that were terrible, Jobs recalled, but they kept at it and they made them better. Eventually, Jobs became so enamored of Excel that he made a secret bargain with Gates. If Microsoft would make Excel exclusively for the Macintosh for 2 years and not make a version for IBM PCs, then Jobs would shut down his team working on a version of BASIC for the Macintosh and instead indefinitely license Microsoft's BASIC. Gates smartly took the deal, which infuriated the Apple team, whose project got canceled, and gave Microsoft a lever in future negotiations. 32 million, boy. Setting that lever. Okay. For the time being, Gates and Jobs forged a bond. That summer, they went to a conference hosted by the industry analyst Ben Rosen at a Playboy Club retreat in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where nobody knew about the graphical interfaces that Apple was developing. Everybody was acting like the IBM PC was everything, which was nice, but Steve and I were kind of smiling that, "Hey, we've got something," Gates recalled, and he's kind of leaking, but nobody actually caught on. Gates became a regular at Apple retreats. "I went to every luau," said Gates. "I was part of the crew." Gates enjoyed his frequent visits to Cupertino, where he got to watch Jobs interact erratically with his employees and display his obsessions. Steve was in his ultimate Pied Piper mode, proclaiming how the Mac would change the world and overworking people like mad with incredible tensions and complex personal relationships. Sometimes Jobs would begin on a high, then lapse into sharing his fears with Gates. We'd go down Friday night, have dinner, and Steve would just be promoting that everything is great. Then the second day, without fail, he'd be kind of, "Oh shit, is this thing going to sell? Oh God, I have to raise the price. I'm sorry I did that to you. My team is a bunch of idiots." Thanks. What would have happened if it didn't sell? Dang, if it didn't sell, we wouldn't even know neither one of them. But they kept working and making it better and better. But it's like even if it didn't sell, you could try again. But they using big money though. Bankrupt. That's why they get paid the big bucks because they can go bankrupt. Or they take, hey, Gates saw Jobs' reality distortion field at play when the Xerox Star was launched. At a joint team dinner one Friday night, Jobs asked Gates how many stars had been sold thus far. Gates said 600. The next day, in front of Gates and the whole team, Jobs said that 300 stars had been sold, forgetting that Gates had just told everyone it was actually 600. So his whole team started looking at me like, "Are you going to tell him that he's full of shit?" Gates recalled. And in that case, I didn't take the bait. On another occasion, Jobs and his team were visiting Microsoft and having dinner at the Seattle Tennis Club. Jobs launched into a sermon about how the Macintosh and its software would be so easy to use that there would be no manuals. It was like anybody who ever thought that there would be a manual for any Mac application was the greatest idiot, said Gates. And we were like, does he really mean it? Should we not tell him that we have people who are actually working on manuals? After a while, the relationship became bumpier. The original plan was to have some of the Microsoft applications, such as Excel, Chart, and File, carry the Apple logo and come bundled with the purchase of a Macintosh. We were going to get $10 per app per machine, said Gates, but this arrangement upset competing software makers. In addition, it seemed that some of Microsoft's programs might be late, so Jobs invoked a provision in his deal with Microsoft and decided not to bundle its software. Microsoft would have to scramble to distribute its software as products sold directly to consumers. Gates went along without much complaint. He was already getting used to the fact that, as he put it, Jobs could play fast and loose, and he suspected that the unbundling would actually help Microsoft. We can make more money selling our software separately, Gates said. It works better that way if we are willing to think you're going to have to. It works better that way if you're willing to think you're going to have a reasonable market share. Microsoft ended up making its software for various other platforms, and it began to give priority to the IBM PC version of Microsoft Word rather than a Macintosh version. In the end, Jobs' decision to back out of the bundling deal hurt Apple more than it did Microsoft. When Excel for the Macintosh was released, Jobs and Gates. When Excel for the Macintosh was released, Jobs and Gates unveiled it together at a press dinner at New York's Tavern on the Green. Asked if Microsoft would make a version of it for the IBM PCs, Gates did not reveal the bargain he had made with Jobs, but merely answered that in time that might happen. Jobs took the microphone. "I'm sure in time we'll all be dead," he joked. That's it for tonight. 177. Start there tomorrow with the battle of the GUI. So the Jobs, like, do he rock with Gates now? Like, did he earn his respect? Like, vice versa? Like, they good? Like, they... Very interesting. Very interesting. But it reminds me of, like, the infrastructure. Like, Gates made his money not off of building the computer. He made it off of, you know, making the computer work. All this stuff, like these computers and everything like that, like they are hardware, but like the software is not installed, like it's not gonna work. Same with like houses. Like if you don't got electricity, it's not gonna work. You don't got water, you're not gonna want to live there. You know what I'm saying? Can't wash dishes, can't wash clothes. So it's like there's a lot of different fields that are be playing into one successful company that can make another $1 billion company in Microsoft. You know what I'm saying? So if you see a bigger company or somebody doing well, figure out what their issue is and how you can solve that. Everybody got issues, everybody got problems. Everybody not trying to come with a solution though.